Yeah. And something like The Girl from Wudang, where it's about, you describe it as being about artificial intelligence, uh, martial arts, and immortality. Can you, without giving too much away, can you share how that comes to be?
Yeah, yeah. So the story, those two were. It's funny because it's the process is a little chaotic, right? And I'll go back to that later, but it wasn't that planned. I had one story in my head that was about kung fu and fighting and how kung fu is inspired by animal styles, and I have always been obsessed about. And as a kid, I was obsessed with bees and ants and how they fought as an army and as one colony and everything. It's like how so. It's since a kid, I was a kid, like
Martians landed,
Yes.
wearing Prada suits,
Yes.
drinking Henry's seltzer,
Yes.
chewing juicy fruit.
Yes. And?
Your branding here,
Yes, brand.
your message here,
Yes. And?
a verse about
Yes.
your product here.
Yes.
I'm Hirsch Redmond.
Yes. And?
I'm a message therapist.
Yes.
And I have a podcast.
Yes, brand.
That's right, that's it.
Yes.
We'll help you fix the world
Yes.
or your bottom line.
All right.
Your bottom line.
Get it. I get it. Welcome to the Yes Brand Podcast.
Hitting the brand voice runway with me today is PJ Pereira. PJ is the founder and creative chairman of Pereira O'Dell. He's been counted among Adweek's Creative 100, Ad Age's Creativity 50, and to the 4A's 100 people who make advertising great. Outside of all of his work in advertising, PJ's a novelist for about a dozen years. He's a martial artist with multiple black belts. And this year, he released a novel called The Girl From Wudang, a novel about artificial intelligence, martial arts, and immortality, which, if you go to the artificial intelligence, martial arts, and immortality section in your local bookstore, there will be any number of volumes dedicated to this confluence of topics. Um, but we're going to talk to PJ today about the book and about his career and his journey to get to this point. PJ, welcome to Brand Voice Runway.
my pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. As we were just talking about, I have a background and familiarity with the advertising industry and particularly working with creative people. Um, why don't you, for our audience's benefit, give us a little background into how you got into advertising?
I started my career as a programmer, and but I always like to write and I always like to draw. And so one day we were kind of work. I was working with my boss on creating a little ad for a company that decided to sponsor the program that we were doing, which was kind of very accidental thing. We're not planned. We just kind of happened to have a sponsor on a piece of software that wasn't normal, and I did a little game for them and thought, oh, that's it's kind of interactive things inside of kind of ads inside of interactive things could be a cool thing in the future. And then when the internet was born, kind of the web was born later, kind of a few years later, I jumped in and got my first job in an ad agency, and then I built my own agency in Brazil, got a job in a in an agency in San Francisco, and then eventually started my own agency here in the US again, because I think I cannot deal with the idea of working for other people. I had to do it for myself.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon for people in the ad business. There are the people that stay with an agency and their entire career, sometimes in the same position, sometimes they rise up in the ranks, but they're company people. They like to
Yeah.
be part of a company. Then there's times where you have your own style and you want to do it yourself. And being a multiple black belt, I think, probably if I were your client, I would give you a little more respect than a lot of ad people get from their clients because
Yeah.
you might kick their ass.
The no's are a little bit more challenging. That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to debate that? We can debate.
um and then tell me a little bit about your martial arts background and when that is that something that started in childhood? Is it something what was the background?
Yeah. And my father was a judo black belt. So I don't remember not at least playing fighting, so every time I was playing with him, we're playing as like little judo games. And then when I was like 11, 12, I started to learn kung fu. And I grew up watching also watching kung fu movies, and it's kind of my favorite thing. So when I continued my entire life, I never stopped. And maybe I had stopped like once I broke my ankle for a year or two. But then if I had to fight, I had to go back because that was the only way to fix the all the pain that I was going through. And that's why I came back. And so it's just like with a few exceptions, with a few small breaks. I turned 50 this year. I think there may have been 2 years here, 2 years there that I didn't do something, but most of my life, I was doing at least one kind of martial arts, if not two.
Yeah, it's interesting turning 50. One of the things that I was thinking about today, I was speaking of athletics and I was in the gym. There was a guy in the gym this morning who seemed to be in his mid to late 40s and I'm in my mid 50s. And I thought, in every punch that he threw and we were at a kickboxing gym, and every punch that he threw, everything that he did, I he made a noise with and expressed it, but I had that feeling. The thought that rushed through my head was he's doing it for the benefit of the people around him so that they know how hard he's working out. I just feel that. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean that every time someone lets something out or has a strong ki or something that they're all of a sudden just showing off. That was the feeling. I felt like, and I was like, oh man, I'm so glad I'm not in my 40s anymore. Because when you're in your 40s, you actually care what people think, I think sometimes, or you compete with others. And when you get into your 50s, maybe, and of course, this isn't a rule or anything, but maybe when you get in your 50s, you start to feel much more competitive with yourself and you care much more. I've talked to friends of mine who are my contemporaries, and they're like, yeah, I don't feel as good. I don't like, I used to be jealous if you did this or that. And, now I don't feel that anymore. And how do you feel turning 50 about, having competed and having, won so many accolades and all of that? How do you feel in the world at this point about that?
Yeah, I can tell that for me, it happened like all the way to my mid 30s. I was highly competitive and worried about others and a reputation and what others thought and everything. Like towards the end um, of like my mid 40s to the late 40s, like between 35 for 36 ish. It's because that doesn't happen like one day. Okay, I just
Right.
turned 37 and then it changes. But the second half of my 40s were like, you know what? Why do I care that much about them? Yeah, of course. There are things like their brands exist. We dedicate
Yeah.
a lot of time to that. So there's reputation that matters. I still believe that, and I still believe in building a name and everything. But I stopped being so emotionally attached to those things. And like in the gym, for example, as you say, like when I started to when I started to train jujitsu, for example, after I moved from the West Coast to the East Coast. As I was 45 when I started to train, and I feel like, you know what, I'm gonna make this be very different from everything else that I've ever done. I always done like striking arts, like punching, kicking stuff, and I really cared about how people around me saw me, and felt like I need to be like the top student, or I need to perform well. I need to do my forms right. I cannot disappoint my teacher. I have to impress and inspire people around me. I need to show that. Then I got here for like, you know what, this is going to be completely different. I'm going to take advantage that I'm changing style. I'm kind of grappling, learning a new art, a new way of fighting, and I'm going to take it very differently. And I'm going to define myself, going to compare me against my own self from yesterday, and see if I can manage that. And I'm having a blast. I'm loving it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Um, and let's segue into the writing. Tell me a little bit about the book and the writing journey.
So this is my fifth novel. I
Okay.
wrote four novels in Brazil. I mean, I was living in the US already, but I wrote them in Portuguese, and published them in Brazil. And so I had this second life that in Brazil. Like in Brazil, I started my career there. So still have a reputation and name there in the ad business. Some of the old timers there still remember who I am, but I'm way better known in back there as a writer than as an ad guy.
Hmm.
So I wrote all my novels, 10 years kind of writing, and finally I wrote for those four books. It took me about 6 years doing it. And along the way, I started to work on this other story that I wanted to that had nothing to do with what I was writing in Brazil. And I wanted to, I thought maybe I should try to do that in English this time. And that was about 7 years ago. So I started to write this one in English. Or it's much more difficult than I thought. And it took me, which basically meant that I instead of doing 10 to 12 drafts, I need to go to 20 plus. So I
Wow.
rewrite the book over and over and over and over until it's a point that I find, okay, now I can abandon it without embarrassing myself too much. But this is the story I wanted to tell. So and it's finally hit the shelves kind of this week.
Yeah. So what is and did you feel um the discipline of writing a novel, even though you've done just in general now, having done five of them, um, the discipline of working in that medium versus advertising, what's that like?
I'll say that writing feels right in the middle of right between my martial arts world and the advertising world. It is the kind of thing that I do in advertising, that is telling a story, but in a much longer cycle with much more discipline, like I do in martial arts. And it took this book took me a black belt amount of time to
Uh-huh.
like, I got my black belt in karate in 7 years. This
Yeah.
book took 8 years to write. So
Yeah.
it's kind of it's very long journey. They have to pay attention. You have to build. It takes time. It takes discipline. Takes continuity, resilience. It takes frustration and discomfort and all those things. But in the end, it's still about finding a story, telling it in the most charming way, the most interesting way they can find, and finding what is the latest time they can start the scene, and the earliest moment you can leave that same scene, but just in a much longer sequence of scenes than you do when you're doing an ad. And without a client, I'm my own client. I'll do it the way I want to do, without asking permission or approval from anyone else.
Yeah. And something like The Girl from Wudang, where it's about you describe it as being about artificial intelligence, uh, martial arts, and immortality. Can you, without giving too much away, can you share how that comes to be?
Yeah. So the story, those two were, it's funny because it's the process is a little chaotic, right? And I'll go back to that later, but it wasn't that planned. I had one story in my head that was about kung fu and fighting and how kung fu is inspired by animal styles, and I have always been obsessed about. And as a kid, I was obsessed with bees and ants and how they fought as an army and as one colony and everything. It's like how so it's since a kid, I was a kid, like, yeah, one day I'm going to invent a ant style kung fu or bee style kung fu. It's a fantasy. Then I felt like it was almost a joke for myself because you couldn't make sense because of how our brains operate.
Well, they
And
did it on Saturday Night Live.
yeah,
They did it with they did it with the killer bees on
yeah.
John
So one
Belushi.
one day I was reading about brain implants and neural lacing and how that can be an alternative for humanity to being to gain scale against artificial intelligence, and because artificial intelligence is um, in theory is infinitely scalable, and our brains are limited to the size of our skulls. But once we put brain implants that connect, they create brain connections from brain to brain, we can actually scale up our collective uh, cognitive ability. And so like, oh, that's very interesting. But more than so there's this race between artificial intelligence brain and human brains, which is a kind of a good dynamic. But if the moment that if you can connect the brains, you can. So those are two stories. But then one day I realized that if you can connect the brains, you can't find like ants or bees. So I'm going to make one story. So that's how it came to be, right? But then once I finished and started to talk about it and started to stop to have conversation with people who read it, I realized that there wasn't planned, but sometimes you write a story just in advertising, you write a story to make a point. You know what you try to achieve at first. It's different with literature that you write the story and then you figure out exactly what you're trying to do, what you're trying to say or accomplish. And I think that looking back, what I was doing, I was trying to tell a story about chaos. The story
Yeah.
about chaos is the chaotic process of writing, but it's also a story about chaos itself. It's a chaos of fighting where you never know if the punch is going to go from the left or the right, for up or down, or if it's going to be a punch or a kick or a throw, and if it's going to hurt you, if you're going to need to block, or you're going to need to dodge, or if you're going to need to fray. You don't know what you're going to have to do, right?
Yeah.
But living with that chaos is an intentional decision that we make to put ourselves in that position and be comfortable with it. And I like it. I enjoy it. I'm feel at home on that chaos. And now as a society, we are throwing ourselves on that same level of chaos where technology is changing in leaps so big and compounding leaps that they're so fast and vast that it's hard to predict what is going to happen. And feels like we're in the middle of so the understanding and dealing with technology and especially when you look at artificial intelligence and what's going to come next with brain implants as well, is going to be a speed and impact on our lives that the only thing I can compare with is being in the middle of a life fight that you have no control whatsoever and you just have to roll in the punches.
And it's all instinct.
Yeah.
It all comes down to instinct, and whatever training you have, that's what you've got
Yeah.
is in that moment. It's interesting to talk about AI a little bit. Um, that's one part of it. What are some of your other feelings about AI and what it means in the immediate term?
I spoke with a lot of specialists like computer scientists, brain scientists, with ethicists, with video game designers and mathematicians, all sorts of people. It's crazy, the craziest researcher that I've ever done. Because on top of that, I was also talking to Kung Fu black belts, to Tai Chi masters in China, and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu black belts here in America and back in Brazil. So it was like very confusing to put all those things together and build a cohesive story. But what I've seen in the AI world is that there's a lot of anxiety, and that anxiety comes from the fact that we can, because of everything we read, we have to manage the fact that we can see the good and the bad that is coming, and and the world seems to tell you they have to have an opinion that is for or against it. It's like, are you for or against AI? Do you want it to stop or do you want it to proceed? Right? And the reality is that AI is not one thing that can stop everything or proceed with everything. Is a combination, a generation of technologies, the kind of computing that is going to influence anything that has a microchip on it is going to have AI elements to it, and everything is a microchip. So everything's going to have some elements of AI. And the reality, when you look at that, I'll say that the what I'm seeing and what people are telling me in general terms, kind of the specialists that I've been talking to, is that yes, there is a 3%, 5% chance of doom, of a catastrophe, really like extinction level events that may come out of this. This is a real thing that it may happen.
Yeah.
Right. So, and if I told you, yeah, your next podcast has 3% chance of causing extinction of the human race, you would not air that podcast, right?
Right.
That's a
Right.
very simple decision. But what happens if that same thing that you're doing, that same podcast, also had a 90% chance of curing cancer? Then it's
Right.
no longer a simple decision. And
Right.
then on top of that, I'll add, all right, so that same podcast that you're doing has 50% chance of messing up big time the fabric of society and democracies and how we operate, but also has a 50% chance of solving a lot of the inequalities that we go through, that we have to deal with today, and we just don't know which side of the land. So
Right.
when you look at all those possibilities, it's
Right.
hard to say no, let's not do it, let's stop it. But it's also very hard to say, yeah, let's do it, let's embrace it. No, it's tricky. And we have to look at all those possibilities independently and try to manage them independently. So, because trying to have one single opinion is what causes all the anxiety and then gets us blind to the possibilities, good and bad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating because we also look at AI as though it's something that happened to us versus something that we collectively have created and implemented and are enabling and exploring. And, it doesn't have any feelings about this.
Yeah,
AI doesn't have an
but
agenda.
it's also it's something that we created, but it's different from other technologies. Because other technologies, the old kind of computing just follows instructions. It follows an algorithm in a program, right? The difference between AI is a kind of computing, not as one object, one entity, this one mastermind. But as a kind of computing, it's a generation of computing. AI is not based on algorithms and sequences of commands. It's based on incentives to learn and to try things and learn from those attempts. That's how machine learning, which is a base of AI, operates. You talk to the guys at the MIT, one of their told us, like, you know what we call AI is actually machine learning. And that's easier to understand
Mhm.
that way. So what it is, machines that are incentivized to learn and to try things so they can learn from these attempts.
Yeah.
So because they're trying lots of things and in multiple ways, they're much harder to predict, if not impossible. At scale, they're impossible to predict because we don't know what they're going to be trying. They're going to try things that we cannot even conceive. So in a certain way, they have their own will. They will try things that we're not gonna be able to expect. And so it's not just that we created that in the past. We're creating the beginning of it, but then it's like putting a creature in the world that is going to develop its own will. It's in a way, it's like it, the best way for me to understand the two kinds of computing is like going from riding a bike to riding a horse.
Yeah.
Bike relies on your legs as power, but it will do everything, whatever you tell it to do. The bike
Yeah.
will obey. The horse has way more power, but it will make some decisions by itself, but it can still learn to communicate between you and the horse. You can come to an agreement and
Yes.
develop your own rhythm together. I not me. I can't ride a horse to save my life. I'm afraid, right? Because they're too powerful and I'm a control freak. But
Oh,
AI is a horse kind of computing that is way more powerful than us. But we can learn to communicate and operate together with it.
yeah. I'm more fascinated by riding horses than riding a bicycle or even a motorcycle because I like that interplay and that adventure, that sense of not having total control, but still having some control.
Yeah.
So I enjoy that. Um, let's talk about your brand, the PJ Pereira brand,
Yeah.
because you have this really strong, when you put your name on a agency and it's a successful agency, there's going to be a strong identification there. And
Mhm.
then as an author, it's essentially that's your baby. This is something that you have brought into the world, these books. So how are you utilizing and how are you viewing your own personal brand at this moment?
It's an interesting question. I'm still trying to figure that out. But I'll say in broad strokes, this is how where I'm pointing it. I think that my main name, my main brand, my main reputation is in the ad business, right?
Yeah.
Period. That's where I made a living. That's where I dedicate most of my time, and that's how I build the circumstances that I needed to even start to write and without worrying about the outcome of it. Just kind of, this is what I want to do. I think those two careers, they have a giant overlap that is on the storytelling side. So I think that the credibility as an author builds credit helps build my credibility in advertising and my experience in advertising, my help me build the name and build and sell the books and tell and promote the stories so they both benefit each other. But I want to manage them separately enough. Although for me, inside of my own head and my life, I'll say that they're 60% overlapped, but the personas and the brands, I'm trying to keep them separate so I can get the credibility or the experience from one side to the other, but the names are clearly separated. So when you're talking to me as an egg guy, you know that I'm on the service business. When you're talking to me as an author, you know that I'm speaking as an artist. They're two completely different mindsets, and I want to give them both the respect that they deserve because it's not necessarily worse or better or worse than each other, but they need to be seen differently. And to the point that I decided to use different names. So I use
Right.
Pereira. I use Pereira as on the advertising side, and I use Caldas, which is my other family name, on on the literature world, which is also because after 15 years, kind of having to try to correct people how to spell the name of the agency. Now I realize that it's a pretty good search strategy for publishing a book where everyone is based on search on Amazon or Google, whatever. It's then like I need an easier one to type. So Caldas is not the easiest, but it's still easier than Pereira. So that kind of trade me the justified separating those things that was the thought that I had in my head for a long time.
But I like that because the audiences are different too. The people that will know your name in the advertising industry is a very specific community versus the people that might enjoy your
Yeah,
books.
but there's an overlap as well. The
Oh,
people
sure.
my friends in advertising will read my book. A person who reads my book may be in the business and kind of later connect and I'm that's a good thing. You know,
Yeah.
those it's not that those worlds never that people cannot be a reader and an ad person or a marketing executive or whatever. There will be an overlap. But
Yeah.
more than anything, I want people to understand what hat I'm wearing when I'm talking
Yeah.
because it's different. And I think that the mindset of being an artist and being a service provider is fundamentally different. And some of the pain that creators go through is exactly because they cannot they cannot help separate those things enough in their own heads.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And do you and who is the audience for this new book as you see it? Who do you expect to really enjoy this book the most?
If this is a book, but it's a very broad audience book to be very honest. And of course, there's people who like martial arts will tend to have get a kick out of it because there's a lot of inner jokes and inner like nuances that come from the fighting world. People who like who are excited, who understand artificial intelligence, may enjoy seeing the technicalities being uh, put in kind of subtext of everything and the implications of everything that is going on. But I try to write that as a very broad term and very wide reaching story where understanding martial arts or understanding the technology is not a barrier. It could be an enhancement to the experience, but it's not a barrier to getting it. So hopefully it'll feel comfortable for anyone that likes like a uh, adventure with a little touch of sci-fi and some spirituality elements and which is some like some of we know those books, we know those movies, we know those stories, and that's kind of the space that I'm playing. It's not that there is a big genre, but it's a small kind of group of stories that have a mass appeal.
Yeah, and are accessible.
Yeah.
It's got a very refreshing take. It sounds like and a very refreshing approach, but it's accessible material.
Yeah.
Um, and speaking of movies and stuff like that, do you envision this being adapted into another medium?
I write in a very visual way, and the story is very propelling. So I think it may make an interesting script. I started to write then as a screenplay first, and then I realized that I don't know the format well enough, or I'm not familiar with it, and so I had to spend too much time thinking about how I'm writing instead of with the story. So I decided now I'll go back to my roots, to what I know how to do. So I wrote that as a novel. But maybe I'm not trying to. If it does, if it gets there, great. If it doesn't, I'm happy as well.
Yeah. And when you work within the studio system in Hollywood, such as it is, whatever we want to call the studio system, but when you work with producers, you might as well not have written any other screenplay version of it first, because their vision of what they're going to hope to collaborate with you on is going to be very different from what you did with the book.
Yeah, yeah,
So, you would have a different experience, I think, in a good way. I think it would
yeah,
be like, okay, they want to do a movie, or somebody wants to do a series or something, and that will be another creature
yeah.
in it.
But
And
the
so,
reality is that one of the best things for me about writing a book is that it's a more solitary experience. It's more you as a creative person, you own more of the story. Yeah, there's still the editor. There are lots of people that get involved, but it's still your decision. You have control, and you type every single letter in there, right?
yeah,
In advertising, you're right. You do it. You create ideas for someone else. That kind of a service. And the entertainment world, the movies and TV and everything. So it's somewhere in between. It's not. You do it for an audience, not a client, but it's still a very collective experience. Still, there's a chain of command. There are a lot of elements and decision makers. They're not you. So I actually appreciate the fact that I had a chance to do the book my own way. So if it eventually it becomes anything, like a movie or a TV series, then great. I have had my opportunity to do it my own way, and I'm open to where it can go from a collective creativity standpoint.
yeah. And finally, tell us. Also, this year you were named chief creative officer of Serviceplan Americas.
Yeah.
So fill us in on that role.
So the agency is 15 years old. Pearl, that was 15 years old, and as a fiercely independent shop, we have always liked the idea that we have that much control over our destiny and everything. But we had partners, then we switched partners along the way. We had partners from Brazil. We switched in the beginning of the pandemic um, to the service plan group in Germany, and it was things were going so well with them that we started to wonder if there was a way to expand the business here in America. And the whole thing started because they were everywhere in the world. They were kind of superpower around the world, but they're not strong in the US. So it's hard to claim to be global without a strong American presence. And we had a brand that was recognized internationally, that had respect internationally, and they were often called to talk to discuss global possibilities and global accounts, global brands, and we didn't have presence, which made it very hard for us to actually get that any of that. And we felt like, okay, if we get married here, if we connect the dots and become partners, like not partners as, oh, let's do business together, but like, let's, be co-own some things here. That'll be great for us. So we started with that, but then we suddenly kind of later realized that we can do more. We can bring more parts of Service Plan to America. We could bring their media agency called Media Plus, and they have been operating here, but we could just put under our umbrella here and help boost the business. We could bring Planet, that is the digital shop that they have. They're one of the largest in the world, and the top player in Europe is specifically. We could bring them here and start to develop that business. We could do other agencies that are not part of the system that we can create, like we do with LNC here. So I felt like there's an opportunity to grow the business, to bring Europe more of what they have in Europe to America, to develop new things in America that we can bring to Europe as well, and create scale without making us slower.
Yeah. And as always, PJ Pereira being at the intersection of tech, entertainment, advertising, a new book as author PJ Caldas. So they can find you. Our audience can find you by searching PJ Caldas. They can find the book. And the book is called The Girl from Wudang. And I really, really appreciate your being on the show today, PJ. And I wish you a lot of continued success and a lot of success with the book.
Well, thank you very much.
All right.
If you liked the show,
Yes, and
it worked for you,
yes, then
subscribe and leave a
yes, friend.
5-star review.
Yes, friend.
Tell all your friends.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Did I make it clear?
Yes, friend.
Get your branding on
Yes.
before they're gone.
Yes.